Good afternoon. I'll speak in Russian. Turns out that we can speak Russian. With ease, I can do that. So, we do not have that much time, so I'll try to shorten the introduction part about the Association of OpenNet. This is an association, the purpose of which is to collect technical expertise in particular, and it's oriented so that the goals of expertise are heard everywhere where it is required. Today, I'll be speaking about risk management, and a very interesting situation is related to risk management, because this is the idea and everything that is done for information security. Moreover, there are serious risks, problems in risk management so that it is understood and is applied. As you can see in the slides, a very interesting survey is done from 2016 on risk management. 60% of respondents stated company executives are only somewhat or not at all informed about the risk posed to their business from today's security threats. In fact, it turns out that people do not know what they're doing. It's clear that the information security is a function that the management should not know about, but it shows the low level of understanding of the management, and the business risks should be considered by the management, which unfortunately does not always happen, just because the picture here is not complete. So, why it happened? Risk management is often reduced to an acronym like GRC, like governance, risk management, and compliance, and it describes the problem sufficiently evidently. There are 3 stages of development, like stage 0, which is ad hoc when the company is relatively new. There is intuitive understanding what various business risks are, and risks of information security in particular. Just because there are few things that people can keep in their heads, individual I mean. Sometimes that kind of an understanding is wrong in the initial stage, but still it's there. Then comes stage 1, growth. During the growth, the control is lost. They do not know what to do with it, unless the company reaches the moment when the company becomes a critical factor. Why is it bad? The company, as a driver of information security, is not that good, just because when people do not what they need, but the risk management is what they need. And when they do it not on high quality. They just do it to meet the request of the people who demand something from them. So accordingly, a gap arises, and the gap among triple gap, cultural. First, it's for formal compliance, what they need, and it has nothing to do with the business, considering to what extent they make them do that. Financial, as all that is very expensive, and many companies think that they cannot afford doing it seriously, and they do their best to reduce the budget as much as possible. And then comes the technological part. It is expensive on every stage. Just because the equipment are expensive, it is human resources, everything that they need to spend money on. As technologies are expensive on all stages of their introduction, accordingly, many think that those are technological problems. How does that risk management take place? The classical form is that risk is kind of an impact multiplied by a probability, and it's measured by dollars or some other currency that the business considers important. Again, there is a problem that both variables are mostly unknown, yet they need to be estimated. That formula, some additional components can be added to that formula. Means, motives, controls, or something else. Still, assessment remains very much relative. Only if the company has a well-documented history of incidents, understanding on what the money has been spent on, and also grounds that in the future the same thing can happen. Still, any quantitative assessment is better than its complete absence. It's good to have some kind of figures than nothing. From quantitative we pass on to the qualitative assessment, this way or that. Or sometimes we also bypass the quantitative part, and here you see kind of a matrix. At the bottom you see a reference. It's a Cox risk matrix theorem. You can Google it and find it because it shows graphically in a very clear way how things happen. To understand the risks, it is necessary to have threat intelligence. I mean, under threat intelligence we understand collection of information which are applied in the relevant systems, and also we include here the information about security, but in fact it's not only this. It's necessary to consider also other threats, and which come mostly from opportunistic attackers that mostly matter. I think that for the audience that I'm speaking in front of, you consider it important that the following, that network operators as natural data source for threat intel. Just because they have natural access to source of that information, they have kind of instrument which this way or that way is applied. The system of intrusion, DPI, DNS requests or queries. Some introduce some managed security service for customers, which can at the same time serve both as a source for that information and the receiver of that information, just to increase the quality of the service. The necessity arises from here to create effective collaboration. So they tell me that I have very little time left, so I need to rush a little bit. It's always good to do something than do nothing. This kind of system can be created while applying limited resources, just to begin with. There should be coordinated aggregate system which will allow allow us to analyze the data. I see three functions of this joint CRT. CERT is the working name. It might also have a different name. It's coordination, with which we can start. Also, incident investigation, response, and tactical analysis. Again, it's the relatively simplest part. And the third is, which is very difficult to do, is real-time and retrospective event processing, which is much harder. That is something that is specific to SOCs. Now I'll show you a practical project, something that we are doing. It refers to vulnerability management. It is the important part of the risk analysis because most of the hacks happened through exploitation of some vulnerability. It's simpler to deal with it, just because vulnerability management requires less social context. It's most of the breaches, so it's easier to work with the machines than with people. It's easy to measure and automatize. Vulnerability management goes through several stages. On the first stage, it does not exist. On stage, on the half stage, there are periodic scans, huge vulnerabilities list, some panic and depression rise, and they get more information they can process. Then comes for huge money, they offer them certain solution for privatization. Turns out they're not sufficient either. They need to do true risk management, and these are risk management vendors which want more money. So why people pay for this? Because it pays back. And starting with a certain level of business, there is no other alternative. That's why, based on that question, more than half of the organizations are suffering from data overload. And I think many more either have massively incomplete data or do not admit their difficulties. 24% do not know anything about prioritization, 20% use CSS. That's a system proposed by NIST to assess it's an American standard which served as basis for assessment of vulnerability. And in fact, there is no alternative. 21% do manual correlation, and 31% use commercial means. Here's the list of main players on risk management or vulnerability management. All three are interesting in their own way. Interested in the sense that they provide very cheap scanner, though they have cost a lot. Qualys tries to integrate threat intelligence and advanced asset management into vulnerability scanning. And this is a rare case, but again, it's clear that if we use any of these solutions, they will corrupt each other. If so, we need to do something to get a bigger picture. Then we need to use other risk management versions, like Brinka does this kind of thing. They collect information about scanners and Russian region, which is missing in the international market. It is interesting as it is. I am not speaking about vendors risk management that do not focus on vulnerability management. But still, it will take long. The secret is that everything is not as difficult as it is. It's not like rocket science. In fact, for continuous vulnerability management, so we need scanners, database, and some nice reporting tools, so that everything works. And it's already here, like Succubus project developed by Schubert Phillips. So for risk management, we need something more complicated. It relies on certain systems, and as a rule, they are not described in the methods, but they are done in a more simple way, much simpler way. And we need to consider the environment. It says that here you see, uh, says the vulnerability risk management requires an estimation tool with good heuristic and to-assist evaluation, method to integrate environmental factors, possible threat analysis data, and vulnerability assessment. So, I do not have as much time to speak about analysis, methods of analysis. How do we evaluate the vulnerability? We need to do it as the hackers do it, because hackers or pen testers, this will show us the true risk. We need to know whether there are only things that is the vulnerability exploitable in our configuration or not, or is there a pre-built exploit for our system available, and what will be the real impact. We know about vulnerability, then we can multiply it by the available resources and try to think of defense measures. I'll bring a couple of examples about a real life. I'll bring a real life example about Mishkok MS14-066 vulnerability. And this is authenticated REC in Windows channel code. It gives exploits are available given top priority by all vulnerability scanners, but in fact, all this is not true, just because all the existing exploits that we know about, they can only damage the server and bring to serious damage the whole system. Yeah, they haven't been demonstrated. I studied the black market just because I needed it at some point, and found out that for reasonable prices, nobody can have it. So traditional vulnerability scanning software scares you as special kind into thinking that they have an immediate and imminent threat, and he should concentrate his efforts on fixing it. At the same time, they consume resources which they could use on something useful. For example, some security aspects, but they assigned like low priority to that. So what to do with this? We planning a joint project with Vulners. It's a search tool for search engine for exploits, and we want to help them to enhance this functionality while creating a reading format for exploits. Now, Vulner's exploit search is for humans, and we want to and so we exploit capability definition markup language, and CVSS describes not theoretical consequences of vulnerability, but in fact it can do the exploit. Here you can see a lot of non-readable letters, but on the example of aforementioned vulnerability MS-066, we see that it receives accurate according to the versions 2.6 and 2.5. The risk is assessed by this simple scheme. We want to add information what is happening in the network. That is, if operators help us to collect this information, then we will see how often the attacks happen and how to categorize them as as per vulnerability. And we have the relevant system to exchange that information. And those who are interested, those who want to take part in this project, write to me, and I think we'll have something to talk about. And I'll let you know about the existing projects on this topic, how all this is described, and how this kind of information is exchanged. Here. So on this slide, I wanted to tell about how all this is going to happen. So we can leave this part. Here you see a diagram. Folders is a place where we'll have this collection of information. We'll correct the data for a specific organization. That is, this is what people will be doing the exploitation of the system. What I didn't manage to plan with the scope of this presentation to speak about. There are a lot of additional technical capacities so that's vulnerability management issues like detecting and avoiding vulnerabilities, scan gaps, scanner list, data collection, etc. Second was implementation and deployment details on fair method and fair methodology in depth, privacy issues for threat intelligence, as because it's clear that not everybody wants to share with the relevant information as to how it all happens. But still, the formative information exchange, if you contact me, I'll tell you about this as well. Here you see the links. This much. Now I'm ready to answer your questions if you have any. I'm sorry that I rushed this much and I kind of didn't manage to go into detail in everything that I wanted to speak about. Colleagues, just I hope the interpreter managed to translate whatever I was talking about. Any questions? Please. Okay, tell your name, please, and then ask the question. Ashot Mirzayan, Armenia National Partner System. Alex, you are under a codename Alex Second. I guess Alex, you won't get offended. I understood that we are getting into risk zone of internet. Turns out that in practical on the operator level, those issues should be operators should come together and try to solve this problem. How actual that risk management is? How should kind of some organizations do not want to pay for that. In principle, as an organization, why should I pay if I'm not be guaranteed for anything? To the extent that I said, this is the issue that should be solved on the level of like in Soviet Union, proletarians of all countries join. Could you please elaborate on this? There is nothing impossible. The thing is that I offer instruments that will allow us to reasonably allocate resources. Probably I should have elaborated what it gives to the operators and what the operators can give to the project. But still, I think that there are a lot of useful things here, and they are evident. And operators will also use this information. They are interested in the security of their own security and the security of the customers. Considering that I propose models that on the early stages require some respect until they show their usefulness.